Mission Log, a Roddenberry Star Trek podcast. Episode 136. Pen Pals.
Welcome into another episode of Mission Log, a Roddenberry Star Trek podcast. I'm John Champion.
And I'm Ken Ray.
Each week, Ken and listeners, here's what we do. We watch Star Trek, and then we pick it apart. We try to figure out what makes it tick and what makes it hold up, or not. Are there morals, meanings, and messages that we can learn from watching Star Trek?
Today, we cover the episode Pen Pals. This is going to be a tough episode, John. I mean, this is going out worldwide. Mm-hmm. The amount of postage that we're going to have to cover out of the Mission Log budget. You know, it might almost be better to go someplace and call everybody to us, which we do from now and again.
I hadn't thought about that. If we just recorded the show, should we do it as a transcript and we just mail it to all of our subscribers?
I don't know. I don't know.
Maybe we should do something different this time around.
We should send it special delivery, though, so everybody who's listening now, just stay home and just wait, because there's something in the mail for you.
Yes. And speaking of mail,
yes,
because we love Pen Pals. And I'm not just giving away the episode. I'm saying that we love Pen Pals and that we love hearing from people who hear us. Mm-hmm. And there are easy ways to stay in touch with us. Mission Log Pod is the address that you need to know to find us on Skype, Facebook, and Twitter. If you want to leave us a voicemail, you can call 323-522-5641. Our email address is missionlog@roddenberry.com. And on our show website, you can find discovered documents and all kinds of great stuff. That would all be at missionlogpodcast.com. And please remember, we may use your comments on an upcoming episode of Mission Log.
Let me ask you a question.
Yeah.
By the way, have you ever just answered the Mission Log phone number?
Oh, you know what? I haven't done that. Should I maybe just set aside time and just be on and ready to go?
Well, I just wonder if that would freak people out, because for my other show, for my Mac podcast, Mac OS Ken, that I've had for however many years I've had that, I've had a Skype number for that show for like 4 years, or 5 maybe. 6? It's been a few years, is my point. Every now and then I think about just answering it, because I assure people when they call that number, I assure people when I promote it on my show that don't worry, nobody is going to answer your call. You can just leave a voicemail. Every now and then I think I should just answer. So maybe one day you and I should do that.
I think that's a good idea. We should just do it in different voices.
No,
hello, thank you for calling Mission Log.
That sounds like a lot of fun. Oh, or we could imitate Star Trek stars.
Ooh, even better. I'm not going to do that right now.
No, I'm not going to do that either.
Skype.
Yes.
But you might be one of the lucky winners who calls Skype. And,
I don't think it's ever actually going to happen. So instead of talking about things that we may or may not ever do, why don't we talk about something that we do every week, a little bit of Star Trek trivia.
I thought you'd never ask. This week we have a great team of TNG regulars behind the scenes. The story is by Hannah Louise Shearer, who we know from Coming of Age and We'll Have Paris and many more. Now, she was around as a writer and a story editor for much of that time. Maurice Hurley kind of ushered this one in. He liked the premise of sending a message to the emptiness of space and actually getting a reply. The script is by Melinda M. Snodgrass, who we talked about getting her start with Measure of a Man, one of those lucky stories of a person getting picked out of obscurity with an unsolicited script. And Wienrich Kolbe is back as director, and we last saw his work on Where Silence Has Lease, and there will be much more of him in the future. Ken, I mentioned a few weeks ago when Picard asked for tea, Earl Grey hot, and we had a discussion about said tea. But at the time, Captain Picard didn't actually get his tea. He got a potted plant. This time he gets his tea. So it was kind of a watershed moment for Star Trek. Very important to note. You may also notice that it kind of looks like the Shoreleave planet or some area of Griffith Park, but the outdoor holodeck scenes were actually shot near Thousand Oaks, California. And all of that stuff was shot by Second Unit since they were up against some really serious deadlines. You had all the filming they had to do on the Enterprise. you had the planet set filming that they had to do, and you had outdoor scenes. So it's one of the rare occasions where that happened, where a different crew went out there with a couple of actors and a horse to get that done.
Well, now, wait a minute. So this was not Omicron SETI 3? This was not Spinnin' Marty's Ranch?
No.
That's too bad. I thought it was. Yeah. It looked like it. It had sort of that feel.
The trees kind of look the same, right?
Yeah.
But,
trees tend to, I guess. But, but yeah, I thought they were back at. I thought maybe some spores were going to jump out and grab Picard.
Right. You could only be so lucky, right? And by the way, we just have to point out that that's not our boss and partner, Rod Roddenberry, sitting in 10 forward about 19 minutes into the show. Yeah,
and don't tell him you think it is either, because it really freaks him out.
It is erroneously reported that is a young Rod Roddenberry. And if you do the math, Rod Roddenberry would have been much younger than the guy sitting at the bar, giving kind of a creepy, painted-on smile throughout that short scene.
Which is, why you might think it's Rod Roddenberry.
I know, right? But no, it's not him.
I mean, it really is weird, because should we say that we were under the impression briefly that we did think it was him?
Yeah.
Well, you sent me that picture, and I was like, it kind of looks like him, but boy, he's changed somewhat since he was that age.
It's a little weird. There's definitely a similarity. Yeah. And he was much more blonde at the time. Yeah. But no, that was not.
Plus, the kid at the bar looks like a punk.
Yeah, right.
Have you thought about who's going to replace me, by the way?
No, but I'm working on it now. Actually, I'm putting that call out on Twitter.
Might as well.
But no, it's not Rod. It is an uncredited actor in that scene. Well, let's talk about credited actors. Nicholas Cascone, who plays Ensign Davies, has been working as an actor pretty consistently since the 80s. He'll have one more Star Trek credit under his belt later. And he also appeared in the movie Titanic. Pretty cool. And Ken, he's in one episode of Moonlighting, which means we'll need to talk about him again in the year 2035.
Wow, I guess we might need to get him on.
Yeah, we might. Yeah. We might. Anne Gillespie, who plays Ensign Hildebrand, appears as a recurring character on Deep Space Nine in a handful of episodes. But I found it most interesting that she's one of the few actors who is a semi-regular on the original Beverly Hills 90210. She played Kelly's mother, and then a regular on the reboot in 2008. And finally, we have Nikki Cox, who plays Sarjenka in this episode. She would have been about 10 years old when this show was made. She had just a handful of credits at the time. One of the more interesting, I think, is that she was in Moonwalker with Michael Jackson. She was one of the kids who was dancing with Michael Jackson. She became much better known, though, through the sitcom world, through a show called Unhappily Ever After, which was it definitely was a knockoff of Married with Children. She was the analog to the Christina Applegate, Kelly Bundy character on that show in this show, Unhappily Ever After. She went on to do much more comedy on TV, like the show Norm with Norm Macdonald and her own show called Nikki. And while working on Unhappily Ever After, she was dating and / engaged to Bobcat Goldthwait, who was a director on that show. And later on, she married comedian Jay Moore in 2006, and he actually legally changed his name to J. Ferguson Cox to take her last name.
How wonderful to hear that even in the faraway future, the art of letter writing is not dead. What scintillating missives these must be. Let Ken tell us more.
Prologue. The Enterprise is headed to the Sulkundi Drema sector. It's the first time the Federation has been there in person, though unmanned probes show geological instability on all 5 of the system's planets. Captain Picard, meanwhile, is headed to the holodeck to go horseback riding. He and Counselor Troy talk about the captain. He likes the companionship of a horse, though he's not into puppies and kittens. Betazoids can't deal with animals because they lose themselves in the animal's thoughts. Picard doesn't get to go horseback riding, though. He's called to the bridge to look out the window. These planets are really breaking down. In the last 150 years, one has busted itself up into an asteroid belt. And the one Captain Picard has been called to see is one giant molten mess. Last time probes were here, it had a thriving ecosystem. Act 1. Riker has an idea for bringing young Ensign Crusher along in his training. He's decided to put Wesley in charge of a planetary mineral survey. Dr. Pulaski is concerned that they might be pushing him too hard and too fast, but everyone gets on board with the plan. The survey is important. Plus, he'll have a team, which means he'll have to learn command. Our little boy is growing up. On the bridge, Data is studying every type of frequency that might come the ship's way. Nothing he was supposed to do, just a personal project. Worf approves, especially since it would reveal both naturally occurring and artificial signals, that he'd like Data to keep his science projects off the floor. Wesley is working on his mineral survey team, but he's concerned that everyone on it will be older than he is. How is he supposed to command them? Riker says, "You just do." Good talk. Wes meets Ensign Davies, tells him he'll be on the team. Davies shows signs of being a pain. He expresses concern about Crusher putting a married couple on the team. "Don't worry, though. If you have any problems, tag me in and I'll take over." Crusher says he thinks he can handle it, but thanks. Commander Data's listening post is still rolling, though there's suddenly something to which to listen. Data picks up one of those artificial signals about which Worf had wondered. What seems to be a child's voice asks, "Is anybody out there?" Data responds, "Yes." Act 2. About to meet his team as a group for the first time, Wes is having trouble with the whole command idea. Dr. Pulaski gives him a pep talk. "You'll be swell. You'll be great. Gonna have all these worlds on a plate. Now get in there, you big nut." Captain's log. It's been 6 weeks that the Enterprise has been studying this system, and each of the planets shows the same sort of seismic instability. Wes's team is hard at work, though Ensign Davies misses a metaphorical spot. Wes would like an icospectrogram on the third planet, but "Look, we know what it's going to say," says Davies, "and besides, it would take at least 5 hours to set up the sensors. Why don't we skip it?" Wes says he'd like to be thorough, but Davies says, "Look, there's being thorough and there's wasting time." "It's also the mark of a good officer to know the difference," says Davies, in a condescending way. Oh, I'm sorry, condescending means talking down to people. Wes backs down. No icospectrogram. On the bridge, Data's science experiment continues. Looking into tectonic plate activity on Drema 4, the android officer gets about as agitated as he ever gets. He goes to the holodeck to talk to Captain Picard, who's finally getting in that horseback riding he's been trying to do. Data explains that he's been in contact with Sarjenka, a child of Drema 4, for 8 weeks. The inhabitants of Drema 4 know nothing of interstellar life, but Data hasn't violated the Prime Directive exactly, since he's never said exactly that he's in space. But Sarjenka's planet is breaking up like the rest of the planets in the Drema system. He would like to figure out a way to stop that from happening, and that would violate the Prime Directive. You know, unless Captain Picard can find another way around it. Picard tells Data to call a meeting of senior staff to talk the issue over. Also, all communication between Data and Sarjenka must cease. Act 3. Wes pulls Commander Riker from, seriously, a date in 10 Forward to talk over his command issues. He wanted an icospectrogram, but Ensign Davies talked him out of it. But he really wanted it. He might even need it. How does he order Davies, who's older and more experienced than Wes, to do what he wants? Riker says, "You just do." Good talk. Riker is then called to the meeting in the captain's quarters while Wes tells Davies he wants that icospectrogram. "You got it," says Davies. And Wes learns a valuable lesson. Command is about commanding. They should have a name for that. Senior staff is assembled in the captain's quarters for a discussion and snacks. Data and Picard let them in on what's been going on. No point in discussing how wrong Data was. How do they save Data's friend? Or can they, without violating the Prime Directive? Worf says it's not possible. Sarjenka and the people of her planet will have to die. Pulaski says she can't go for that. Riker says maybe Sarjenka and her people were fated to die, though Troy and LaForge argue maybe the Enterprise was fated to save them. In the end, Picard decides that they have to let nature run its course. He orders Data to cease all communication with Sarjenka, which I could have sworn he had ordered before, but apparently he really means it this time. Data goes to officially isolate and delete Sarjenka's frequency from being received by the Enterprise, but there's Sarjenka's voice for all the senior staff to hear, pleading with Data for help and to talk to her. She's afraid. Picard may not be good with kids, but having heard the call for help, he can't let this one die. Data's whisper from the dark has now become a plea, and they cannot turn their backs. Act 4. They figured out what's causing all the planets in the Drama system to go haywire. Actually, the Mineral Survey team figured it out. We could go into why, but why? The real point is that Wesley's insistence on the icospectrogram led to the answer. So, can they reverse the process in time to save Drama 4? His team says they'll get cracking. Meanwhile, Data has figured out the safest place for Sarjenka and her family to go in the midst of the tectonic instability. Picard tells Riker to tell Data to tell Sarjenka where she needs to be, but atmospheric interference makes communication impossible. Data asks for permission to beam down and tell her where she needs to go. Picard, Riker, and Data try to skirt the issue, and then they just give up. Data can beam down and give Sarjenka the message, but if he sees anybody else, he's to beam out immediately. When he beams down, though, he doesn't see anyone. Sarjenka and her family are gone. Outside, it's pretty much hell. Fire, hot winds, lava. Like the planet at the end of Revenge of the Sith, which is basically like hell. Suddenly, a little girl-type humanoid comes running into the room. This is Sarjenka, and Data introduces himself. Her family has evacuated, but she's come back to get her transmitter. She couldn't bear the thought of Data calling her and not getting a response. The way she's been calling Data and not getting a response. Ouch. Things outside have gotten bad. Sarjenka won't make it back to her family. Data decides the best thing to do is to take her back with him to the Enterprise. Act 5. Aboard the Enterprise, Sarjenka is super spooked. She's fine as long as she's with Data, so Data takes her to the bridge. Picard tells Troy to take Sarjenka to sickbay, but Sarjenka is freaked out. Data says he can do his job and keep her with him. His job, by the way, doing something science-y to save Drama 4. You'll be shocked to find it works. Sarjenka has learned a lot. She's seen a lot. Sarjenka knows too much. Killing her is obviously not an option. Picard has a better plan anyway. Pulaski is to erase her memory from the point that Data and she started communicating onward. Data is sad that she will not remember him, but he will remember Sarjenka. And in all of this, Picard says Data has moved closer to humanity. The end.
Hey, they did something science-y.
Something science-y.
I was so glad to hear that.
They found things under the stuff, and they sent a vibration, and there were probes, and, you know... And probes are kind of a thing for aliens to do. And in this case, we're the aliens, so really an alien probe hitting the planet, not overly surprising.
And then science happened. And it worked.
Oh, no miracle occurred. No. It's, you know, we start here, then science, then the end.
Yeah, in the end. By the way, I mentioned that the holodeck stuff was second unit, but I just want to now say, kind of in review of the show, I'm really glad to see some location shooting on Next Gen again, because, you know, there have been others, but I would say one of the most memorable was in Justice, when they were at the water reclamation plant up in the valley, and it just lends a broader sort of perspective. It makes the worlds bigger that Star Trek has. And then because they are suspending disbelief on the show that they are in a holodeck, we get to suspend disbelief even better. That's what's happening. So I really like that. I thought that was cool. And there were good moments for Picard.
It was a very refreshing shot. I mean, it's interesting to see that the camera is tracking him riding a horse at not quite full gallop, but a decent trot. Right. And so, I mean, it's weird. But the second or third time I watched that scene this week, it really felt like a breath of fresh air.
Yeah. It's very rare that we get tracking shots on this show that aren't limited to about 5 feet on the bridge.
Yeah.
You know?
I gotta say, there was something that was funny about that whole exchange, though, when Troy and Picard are talking over why she doesn't like to go horseback riding. She says that she prefers a mode of transportation that doesn't have a mind of its own. She's on the Enterprise. Now, maybe she's not really aware of, everything that happened with Moriarty, even though she did say that she was feeling a presence coming from the holodeck, and she knows that whole thing was made by the Enterprise, and certainly good thing that nobody ever told her the story of the Practical Joker.
Yeah, right.
But I wonder if she would ever leave any planet ever again, if she had any idea of just really how little control she and everyone around her actually have of this giant metal thing that's, pretending to let them fly it through space. Who actually knows for sure?
Well, remember, Geordi said that about 90% of the Enterprise is controlled by the computer, and you and I thought he was off by about 9.9%.
Yep, pretty much. Yep. Yeah. You get the wheel, and you get the pedal, and that's it. And everything else, the ship's just kind of doing on its own.
Even then, it's sort of like one of those kiddie cars where the kid has the wheel and the pedal, but really there's an adult standing behind it pushing it along.
Yeah, either that or sort of like bumper cars. So you got the wheel, you got the pedal, but you've also got the strap, and somebody could just flip a switch and all these cars just stop.
Exactly.
Yeah, I like our Enterprise a lot.
I do. A lot of fun. Yeah. A lot of fun. Last week, I think it was, I talked about the idea of people on the Enterprise kind of being orphans, and not literal, but also kind of figurative orphans. That this is a line of work that you can go into if you are not particularly concerned about a family life. And I talked about Wesley, and even though, yes, his mother is alive and we know where she is, she chose to take this job, and Wesley chose to stay on the Enterprise. There was something about that scene where you're in the conference room and there's everybody on the senior staff talking about Wesley. And I just thought, okay, I was not particularly a very angsty teenager,
right?
But I thought that's the kind of thing that would make me a particularly angsty teenager, is just knowing that there's this room full of like 10 adults who are just not only talking about the job, but just like, well, here's how we think that this applies to his maturity. Right. And he's not a part of the conversation.
Right.
I just thought that it would be incredibly bizarre and infuriating to know that was going on.
Well, okay, a few things. First of all, it apparently would make you angsty because there were nothing like 10 people in that room. I wouldn't say it was 5 or 6.
Well, it was the entire senior staff.
It was the entire senior staff. That's true. The other thing I will say, though, is he is an ensign in this. We've discussed it before. Militaristic, if not actual military organization. People are going to be talking about him all the time, right? Without his knowledge or knowing. Yeah.
But again, it's not just the job. It's like then suddenly the job becomes the parent, and that's what's so weird to me.
Well, that's what he signed on for. When he did not leave, when Dr. Crusher left, this is what he's there for now.
I know.
They had this discussion in the first episode of season 2.
Doesn't make it any less weird.
All right, if you say so. It's an accepted weird, though. That'd be like if we were watching the original series and you're like, so what's up with the pointy ears? And I'd be like, dude, we're in season 3 now. The pointy ears are going to stay. All right?
Anyway.
I'm not, but I'm just. Okay, so the thing that struck me as odd about that whole exchange is Picard, when he's first, when Wesley first gets the mineral survey assignment, Picard tells Wesley that he appreciates an officer that will admit ignorance and seek help more than an officer that'll cover his ignorance and blunder blindly forward, right? That is until like the life and death of a planet are on the line. Because then, Picard's like, so can you stop this planet from blowing up? And Wesley says, I think so. And Picard says, hey, none of this mamby-pamby I think so crap, okay? Can you or can't you? Now, I think, honestly, one of the best management lessons that was learned, or one of the best, dealing with management lessons that was learned, was actually his not little scientist, she's average-sized person.
Right.
The scientist on his team going, we'll get to work on it. Okay, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Picard said, can you do this or can't you? And she said, we'll get started. She didn't say yes. She didn't say no. She was like, I can't even answer that question right now because I'm already doing it.
Right.
Maybe.
Right.
It was
Picard, and we've seen this on more than a few occasions where Picard just cuts somebody off like, no, I want an answer now.
Yeah.
There is no room for I don't know.
Right.
Which, well,
I mean, there is when it's not important, but when it's important.
Yeah, but this is still a it's not a research vessel. It is an exploratory vessel.
Right.
And part of exploration, part of research, part of science is I don't know. Mm-hmm. So we have to get more information before we can know.
So you say this isn't a research vessel. The Enterprise is a transformer without actually changing shape.
Yeah.
I mean, sometimes it's running defense, sometimes it's on offensive missions, sometimes it's research, sometimes it's science. It's anything you need it to be.
Sure.
Yeah, it's got a little bit of a D&D thing going there.
Yeah. I do love how, we were talking about the relative sentience of the Enterprise computer. I like how there's the moment where Wesley is standing in the corridor, mm-hmm. and he's trying to kind of work up the nerve to go into the room with the other two ensigns that are on his team. And he hasn't gone in. He's just sort of pacing back and forth, and he'll walk up to the door, and then he'll stop, and he'll walk back. And I love how those automatic doors are smart enough to not open while Wesley is hesitating outside.
That's interesting.
Because he walks right up to it, and he's like, "Nah, I can't go in."
Yeah.
And then he steps back. And who is it that catches him in the hallway? Is it
Pulaski?
It is Pulaski, yeah. And then when she kind of gives him a little bit of a pep talk, then he turns around and walks right up to the door, and the door opens.
Do you remember the elevators in Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy that it can actually see the future?
Right, yes.
Yeah,
yes.
It's kind of like that, maybe. Maybe they have a little bit of ESP.
Yeah, they must.
They know, he doesn't really want to go through this door. Yeah. Can they tell the difference, though, when you don't really want to go through the door, but you have to anyway? That's the question. Mm-hmm. Or is it like a fail-safe that's all over the Enterprise, where it's like, I don't think you're ready to go in here. We're going to hold off on you. It's just a good thing they're not on a thinking vessel. Actually, doors. I had a question about a door. Mm-hmm. Actually, I had a few questions about the Drayman Society, Drayman 4 anyway, because we don't know about 1 through 3, and we don't know about 5. Well, one of them's an asteroid belt now, but otherwise we don't know a lot.
Right.
About the Draymans specifically, what in their racial or cultural history made the forehead carapace and the exceedingly long pinky finger natural evolutionary traits? This is what I wondered. Yeah. How do they have the technology to make doors that literally dematerialize and then rematerialize at the touch of a hand, but not think to, ever look up, like at the stars, like look up past the sunrise to the sunset? The big question I have, though, about the door specifically, how do you walk through that door?
Well, how do you mean? You put your hand up, the door disappears, and then you walk out.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. But what's triggering the door to close again, right? So you touch the door to open it, and then you put your hand back up to get the door to close again. Mm-hmm. I would think if you touch the door to open it, that as soon as your nose crosses whatever plane that is, the door's just going to close again. And either you're going to break your nose or you're going to cut your nose off. But if you don't touch the door first, are you just supposed to walk through the door with the kind of faith that it's going to open because it's going to open because it's going to know that I'm going to walk through it, kind of like the psychic doors on the Enterprise?
They have very smart doors. And in fact, if you can say anything about the Draymans, they have the smartest door. These people, they don't have space travel.
Right.
They don't communicate with other space travelers.
Right.
They have magic technology that will materialize and dematerialize solid objects, though not apparently themselves. They do so they can do all of this stuff. And now they're going to be known throughout the galaxy. It's the Draymans, they're not good for much.
Yeah.
But man, their doors are great.
Door maker to the stars and to the stars, if they understood that, there were actually stars in the stars.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That scene with Wesley talking to Ensign Davies and Hildebrand, for that matter, and they're like, "Oh, but you know what? It takes 5 hours to set up the machinery to do an iconospectro science words
iconospectrogram. Come on, dude.
Yeah, there you go.
Actually, not icono. It's ICO. ICO spectrogram. Icogram for short.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
But Picard says in one of the voiceovers when we come back from commercial that they've been there for 6 weeks. that system.
And then we can assume that they're there for another 2 because Data says that he's been in touch with Sarjenka for 8 weeks by the time he takes that to Picard.
Right.
So they've been there for 2 months now.
Yeah, so 5 hours.
I know.
That's
a lot of time, though, dude.
Instant Davies is lazy.
It's a lot of time to do one thing. You know, we've never actually addressed how long a shift is on the Enterprise.
Oh, it's just constant.
But you think? Because it could be like 45 minutes. We don't know. We don't actually know what constitutes a full workday on the Enterprise.
Oh, 5 hours. That's going to take me 6 days.
5 hours? That's like 3 hours of overtime. Are you sure you want to pay that?
I got to get in my holodeck time. I got to go hang out 10 forward for no apparent reason.
Yeah, there's a lot of that.
Yeah, but the team are good with Wesley in charge, and good for him. That was a good moment. You know?
Wes in charge was actually going to be one of the spinoffs. And then Charles in charge actually happened a few years earlier, and they realized that might seem derivative. It's weird to me, the change in Pulaski here, and it's not an important change, but it's worth noting. When they're talking about whether or not they should save Sarjenka and her family, and her planet, by the way, her argument is Data's friend is going to die, and that means something. And Worf says, to Data, to which Pulaski replies, does that invalidate the emotion? I'm sorry, the what? Because he's a machine, right? He can't have emotions. Can he, Dr. Pulaski, from early in season 2? Later in season 2, she actually seems, cool with the fact that, his zeros and ones are coming into something like compassion. And that means a lot to Dr. Catherine Pulaski.
It was a good scene. That was my favorite scene in the show.
Well, it's the scene in the show, isn't it?
Well, it is, yeah. So we talked about the Enterprise computer being sentient and the doors knowing when you're going in and all that stuff. And I love that little moment with Chief O'Brien in the transporter room. But I have a new theory that I want to float out to you and to our listeners, that I'm starting to think that Chief O'Brien is a creation of the Enterprise computer in the form of a holographic human being.
Really?
Yeah, because he literally just activates anytime somebody opens the door to the transporter room. Nobody has transported that we know of in going on 8 weeks. Yep. 8 weeks, nobody has transported. And yet you open the door and there he is, standing at the controls, ready to go.
Well, he is transporter chief.
He is, but there's nobody coming into that room.
Yeah.
At all. So I think that it's like... I was very impressed when I was very little, and we got like a pantry door or a closet door that had the automatic light switch thing. So you open it and the button's built into the door, and I think that's now how Chief O'Brien has activated. The doors open and boom, he's there. Oh, look, we're ready to beam down. We didn't even call down to say we're on our way.
The only problem I have with that idea is if that were the case, then I would expect him every time he pops up to say, please state the nature of your teleporting emergency.
Right. Yeah.
I don't know why I think that would be something that he might say. That's weird.
But hang on to that.
You think I should?
Yeah, hang on to that.
I'll jot that down.
Yeah, you might be able to use it.
All right. Yeah. I thought it was interesting, actually, that Picard orders Riker to handle the beam down himself. Are they so what's the plan here?
Right.
Because they have captain's logs. They're going to the Drama system, right? And then they're there for like 8 weeks. But they're not going to tell anybody that they beamed Data down, which I'm assuming means they don't want Starfleet to know, which I'm assuming means they're not going to tell Starfleet about saving the planet, which I'm assuming means that everything that Wesley's team did is off the record, which I'm assuming means that they're going to try to somehow hide everything that happened for this 2 months.
They're already working on retrofitting torpedoes to do the work. That work is already in process. So if you're just talking about from a pure inventory point of view, you've got some answers.
Yeah. So I'm looking through your captain's log here. And thank you for printing it out, by the way. But there seem to be these 2 months are just gone.
Right.
Can you tell me what happened there? No, I can't. Okay. And the torpedoes, because it looks like about 16 torpedoes missing. Can you tell me what happened there? No. Okay. Could Data tell me? That could be a problem. So he's going to be unavailable for questioning for the rest of for the rest.
Right. Now there's a moment with Picard, because we know that Picard doesn't like kids on the bridge. We get that because he, had that initial run-in with Wesley, but now he's warmed up to Wesley. But he is seriously about to pop a vein in his head when Sarjenka comes on. If you look at him, and watching that scene several times, he's almost shaking, and he's just talking to Riker like this is a multi-headed beast that just crawled out from under his bed. He's terrified of this kid. And I just thought, there's still a part of the job that involves seeking out new life and new civilizations. And the whole reason that they are there is because of the message from this girl. So at least there should be a little bit of curiosity that this is the catalyst that kicked off this whole story.
Well, let's go back to the plausible deniability that we were just talking about 30 seconds ago.
Sure.
So now everybody on the bridge has seen this kid. The kid has seen the bridge. Everybody between the transporter room and the bridge has seen this kid. What's the thing? Two people can keep a secret if one of them's dead. At the end of this episode, Picard really has to blow up the Enterprise. If he wants to keep this off. If he wants to keep this off Starfleet's radar.
I wouldn't put it past him. Hey, and is this a new thing now? Where we have a thing in sickbay that can erase memories? Because if so, I don't know if I want to serve on that ship.
It's a very old thing, actually. It's a Tantalus device, right?
Oh, man.
Except now in liquid form.
Dr. Tristan Adams.
Yeah.
Paging Dr. Adams.
And then whatever they used on Lord Garth. Lord Garth! Whatever they used on Lord Garth to get him, back to rights. That was the thing as well. I was actually very curious about. So, in sickbay, Sarjenka finds an Elanan singing stone, I guess it's called, on Pulaski's desk. Totally unimportant thing.
Yeah.
Except that Data leaves it with Sarjenka when he drops her off at her house on her planet after they've erased her memory, right? Now, Pulaski explains to Data, to remember you and the ship would complicate her future. She has to be the person that she was born to be. So what we're going to do is we're going to erase all memories that include you, which is going to include right up to the run up of her planet exploding, right? Or breaking down. So she's not going to remember that, even though everybody else on her planet is going to. And she also is going to have this extraterrestrial rock.
Yeah.
It's good that they saved the planet, and they did technically save Sarjenka's life. I'm not 100% certain that they've actually put her, and maybe I should have left this for the next segment. I apologize. I'm not really 100% certain that I don't think she is now going to be living her life the way she was meant to live her life. She'll live her life, but, she could also be the crazy person in whatever village.
Right. Yeah.
Because she's the only one who doesn't remember. Plus, she's got that rock that makes a noise when you hold it, and it makes a different noise when you hold it. Yeah. I'm not sure the extent of the favors that they've done for Sarjenka.
Forgive me, but applying the misnomer pen pals to two people talking to each other on a subspace walkie-talkie really bothers me. There should be writing. Pen is in the title. You know who should have thought of this? The writer.
Every now and then, Ken, like last week with the Icarus Factor, I feel like the parallels between different characters and different plot lines are a little too on the nose. Like in the Icarus Factor, we have, here's this violent Klingon ritual that Worf has to go through. Oh, and look, here's this violent ritual that Riker is about to go through, because that's what they're both going to do. And in this one, I appreciated... It wasn't particularly subtle, but I appreciated the holodeck scene with the Horus more in retrospect after seeing the episode play out. Picard has a great line in there. He doesn't want to get attached or, quote, anthropomorphize anything. And it says something about Picard's kind of cool scientific detachment from what's going on. And it says something about then his ability to objectively size up the situation with Sarjenka. Here's an alien being. Yes, it's a living thing, but I'm not about to anthropomorphize her and say that I know best what she should do. I know best what the outcome should be here.
Well, wait a minute. It's not anthropomorphizing her.
Well, yeah.
Because, I mean, she has, I mean, she's alive. She has feelings. She can communicate.
Well, she's alive. She can communicate. She's not human, and we don't know that we can necessarily apply human emotions, human logic, human rationale, any of those things.
Sure, we do. We know that
now,
based on what Data is talking about. What he doesn't want to anthropomorphize is the numbers. He doesn't want to think about it. He doesn't want. I mean, he wants to think about it, but to an extent. I mean, he was willing to let her die until he heard her voice. Which I mean, is sort of. Yeah, I mean, what he really doesn't want to anthropomorphize is the situation or the philosophical discussion.
Yeah, I mean, until that point, all he knows is that this is a thing. It's a living thing, but this is a thing.
Right.
And even after that point, when he hears the voice, well, again, like, what if this is Balok? You know, what if this is a little tiny person with the look and the sound of a little tiny human?
Right.
But really has tremendous power that could disable your ship, you know? So there's a reasonable version of this that he keeps his distance purely out of self-preservation and out of the fact that he doesn't have all the information. So I kind of get that. The other thing that I thought was interesting here is that there's an examination of leadership, which I mentioned earlier when we have that scene with everybody sitting around the conference table talking about Wesley. Mm-hmm. And that examination was a bit academic. Like I like the discussion that Riker has with Wesley when they're in 10 Forward. Mm-hmm. And I like that Wesley is intimidated with authority because that actually plays out as a pretty... Like, it's very simplistic in the show, but it's still a realistic thing for him to get over and for him to experience. What I had a hard time buying in the scene was just the way that they talked about it, because it was almost like somebody on the writing staff was reading from a book on leadership competency, you know, and Riker is just telling him, well, you will learn this because it will help you with self-confidence. So go.
Right.
You know, it didn't feel as it didn't feel much like natural conversation, but I thought it was definitely a better way to have that conversation than the "don't do drugs" speech that we got in season 1. Say,
yeah, no, it's not. I mean, it's. I don't want to boil it down to fake it till you make it, but I mean, basically, you do the uncomfortable thing until the uncomfortable thing becomes comfortable in a way. If you actually analyze, their whole situation, though, it is kind of interesting, and they don't analyze it, so there's little point in us analyzing it. It's not really a central point of the show, I don't think, but. Wes is like, so I wanted to do this, extra, the icogram, and he didn't want to do the icogram. And what if I'm wrong and we didn't need the icogram anyway? And Riker's like, well, sometimes you're going to be wrong. Yeah, but what if I'm wrong and somebody dies as a result?
Yeah.
And Riker says, well, here's the question you have to ask yourself. What would Picard do? I'm trying to remember. Has Picard ever made a decision that got anybody killed? Has Picard ever made Really? That's what we're going to do. It kind of surprised me. It's like,
well, but here's the thing. It is central to the topic in this episode because Picard at that very moment, well, not that very moment, but within the fabric of this episode, is trying to make a decision. Do I let these people die? Or do I not?
Right.
Do I take one course of action or another course of action? Then here's Wesley thinking, well, I could either get this wrong or more wrong, or maybe I get lucky and it comes out right.
Here's what I'm saying, though. Jack Crusher, we are given to understand, died because of a decision that Picard made.
Yeah.
Do you really want to say to Jack Crusher's kid, just think about what Picard would do?
He'd kill my dad. That's what he'd do.
Exactly. Oh, you know what I will think about that, Commander Riker? Right after I drink as much synthahol as I can find over at that bar. Right. Unless they've got the good stuff. I don't know. It struck me. I mean, it was interesting, and it makes sense, and it's a good payoff.
Yeah.
It's a little too bonk on the head, but it's a good payoff that, Davies, who had been against it, has to sit there and acknowledge, wow, if I hadn't done the thing that, young Commander Crusher wanted me to do, we never would have found this, which means they never would have saved the planet.
Yeah.
At the same time, I'm just not sure that, saying, well, what would the guy who made the decision that got your father killed decide? Good question. Thank you. You've given me more to think about than I wanted.
Well, let's talk about the real meat of the episode here. We get to violate the Prime Directive in ways that we never have before. And I love the debate, especially with Worf and Pulaski kind of playing the two sides of this. This is what's good about Star Trek. Not that there is an easy right answer, but that we get to keep playing with the idea of ethical or moral choices. We talked, I think back during like season 1 of the original series, we talked a very long time ago about that old intellectual exercise. If a train were approaching and you could throw the switch to avoid killing 5 people versus 1 person, what would you do? Okay, right. Well, I choose the least destructive path. Okay, well, what if that 1 person were your mother or your father or your brother, somebody close to you? And then the game changes, and there is no right answer. There's only the ability to talk about how we might behave. And is one moral decision more moral or less moral than the other? And that's what's interesting about shows like this. Data cuts to the core and sides with Pulaski. It's about the people, no matter how many. It's about the fact that these are people who have lives. And Picard, I thought this is what was so cool. Picard changes the conditions of the debate. What if it's war? What if it's slavery? It's about protecting us to keep us from acting out emotionally or irrationally when we size up a situation. But then Picard hears the voice, and he has this emotional change. And I wondered, why does Picard compromise so fast? Does he truly think that the conditions have changed now that he perceives Sarjenka's message as a call for help? Because Sarjenka doesn't know that she is specifically asking for help from this passing starship that even has the ability to help. It's just this sort of, well, I said something once, I heard from Data. I don't know who or what Data is. I don't know where Data is. I don't know what Data's abilities are. I just said help. And then I got a reply. So for Picard, I really wondered about that change because it seemed, it didn't seem too sudden, and it seemed real. It certainly seemed genuine, but everything changed at that moment. And then all the intellectualizing, all the argumentation went out the window, and it just became about, well, crap, here's somebody in need. And no matter what now, Prime Directive is out the window. We got to help.
Yeah.
Even though they go about covering their tracks. uselessly covering their tracks.
Well, we don't know if it's useless or not.
Yeah, well, I would say that it's useless because they're already working on torpedoes. They're working on all this other stuff.
Yeah, no, they're going to have to find a way to cover that up. And anybody who's not on board, they're going to have to kill. Oh, met with a tragic accident, sadly, right after we left the Draymond system. Yeah, there was... I love the fact that Picard basically... And it's good that he didn't go through and do it with everyone. But I love the fact that Picard hit Pulaski in a way that she had to sort of step out and think. I mean, she's a healer, right? Yeah. Which kind of ultimately means she is a fixer. And so if there is a disease ravaging this planet, she's a doctor. She wants to fix it.
Yeah.
If there is this natural disaster and they have the ability to fix it, or this impending natural disaster and they have the ability to fix it, she wants to fix it. And so he has to take her to a place where she looks at it through a different lens. So what if it's war? What if it's slavery? And automatically she's like, well, no, we can't interfere then because, people are choosing at that point. Then people are involved in a way that they can control. And so we have to be hands off. And while I'm glad that Picard, did not then go through to everybody and go, and you, what if it was at this thing? And you, what if it was at this thing? I did wonder, though, if there was any part of the warrior that is Worf that would say, well, no, that we would do. And I don't know what that would be exactly, but I did like the fact that he twisted it. And he pointed it out, too. He was like, okay, good. Now that we're all off of our moral certitude, let's really talk about this. Because, I mean, they're not going to make the knee-jerk reaction. They're going to make he's not going to let them make the knee-jerk reaction anyway, or take the knee-jerk reaction. They're going to make an informed decision. I love the fact that Picard argues that the Prime Directive is not just there to protect the other culture, and not just there to protect the future. It's there to protect the Federation from letting its emotions overwhelm its judgment. Mm-hmm. This is what I have said the Prime Directive actually is, I believe, since the first season of TOS, since we covered the first season of TOS. The Prime Directive is you lay out this, system of this is who I say I'm going to be. This is what I say I am. And then you act like it, whether it's easy or not. And it goes right back to the Corbomite maneuver. They defeat Baylock. Yay, they defeat Baylock, and they're leaving because there's nothing they want more than to be away from Baylock, except then Kirk is like, we got to go back and help that guy. Yeah. Because that guy's hurt, and that's who we say we are. So, let's go back and help that guy. It was interesting to hear the Prime Directive laid out, because it seems to sort of be touted by some fans of the show. Mm-hmm. And I'm not making fun of them, but or saying anything bad about them, but it seems to be sort of touted as this like high and mighty, like, oh no, we're going to let them evolve on their own. We're not going to interfere because it would be wrong for us to interfere because that might be bad for them. Well, I mean, it's also a big CYA memo for everybody in the Federation, right? Make sure that this doesn't come back and bite you. In a way, this felt like another episode of Law and Order 1701D, especially when it came down to Sarjenka's 4-word question, whether that can be considered a call for help. Mm-hmm. Once Picard hears Sarjenka himself, he doesn't feel like they can turn away. And I'm wondering, is this because she's now more real to him or because he's interpreting it as help? Because she never actually says the words, help me. I mean, that's the thing. So, I mean, the prosecution could say she never once asked specifically or explicitly for help, even though there's a plaintive tone to her voice that makes you think, well, I mean, obviously she's looking for help. She's asking for help. And if the request for help is implied, then are they compelled to help her? Because it's like that. It's like the what was the gigantic drug dealer druggie episode where the symbiosis. It's like in Symbiosis. They asked specifically for help. Yeah, which is why they brought them aboard. Go the other way, the one with Offenhouse and LQ Sonny Clemens, the neutral zone. They didn't ask for help, but Data went ahead and helped them anyway. Because, well, look, they would be alive if we just made them alive, so let's make them alive. And then Picard's like, why did you make them alive? Right. They were dead, and I was cool with that. I mean, it's sort of a dicey, it's a very dicey gray area in which we find them. But I love the fact that they're discussing it as analytically as they possibly can. Anybody who's letting emotion get the best of them, he's like, hey, cool your jets. Let's talk about it in these terms. And then they all have to go, oh, okay, yeah, in those terms, right. Then, of course, they hear the little girl's voice, and it's like, emotions on the table, everybody, so let's fix this. Yeah, well, and that's why I pointed at that scene a little bit ago, because I just felt like, is that specifically the right thing that would make Picard totally turn around? Picard so far has not shown himself to be a real softy on emotional issues, particularly with children. Mm-hmm. Later in the episode, he's literally just going apoplectic at the idea that this child is on the bridge. Mm-hmm. But so I did wonder about that. But at least for everybody else in the room, Pulaski in particular, she's already had the emotional argument. She's already, like you said, put herself in the position of the healer, the fixer. So now even Picard knows that hearing the voice has magnified that impression. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I like this take on the Prime Directive because it says that you have to take a situation like this and actually think through. Riker says, well, if we could see every outcome, we would be gods, right. Which they are not. But it says that you have to sit through and think out logically what these outcomes are. Now, we're very lucky that we're on a starship full of extremely talented, smart, thoughtful people who can sit in a room and get along with each other and have this high-minded moral discussion. Maybe unlike Earth, which has billions of people on it who
can't seem to agree on anything.
Right.
Take a situation like this and put it before Congress and say, okay, go and consider the moral and ethical outcomes of what you decide today, whether or not you interfere or do something with this situation that's in another country. So
in another country, in our own country.
Well, in our own country, sure.
I mean, and that's one of the things that I loved, honestly, about what Picard said, was that the Prime Directive was there to protect them as well.
Yeah.
We got one of those. It's called the Constitution.
Yeah.
And the thing is, we sometimes, and forgive me, it's actually called a whole bunch of laws in addition to the Constitution. I mean, it's called the legal system that we've set up. It is fascinating how we will then, as our own government, will employ people to tell us how we can get through or around this thing that we've set up to do.
Right.
But not necessarily with the whole ethical, moral side in mind, but just, no, seriously, are you sure that word means what that means? Yeah. I mean, it honestly goes to something as silly as, it depends on what your definition of the word is. I mean, we look for ways to justify what we want to do within legal groundwork, and what Picard is appealing to is the best that the Prime Directive can be for everyone. Mm-hmm. We aren't necessarily those people, but it's not the 24th century yet, so give us time.
Right.
I did have. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Ahead.
No, you.
I would say I had to ask myself if Data was acting logically or emotionally. It's sort of like we're back where we were with Spock when he would use logic or use the org chart to get what he wanted, regardless of how it looked to others or how appropriate it might be.
Yeah.
So are we showing then that Data has formed an emotional bond with someone he doesn't know in a way greater than he has with people he does know? So we know now that Data and LaForge are friends, so there's a bond there, and certainly in a greater way than Picard would allow himself with a horse. Granted, a holographic horse, but any pet for that matter.
Right. Made me miss Tango.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. It's been a while on that. Oh, yeah, I remember Tango's name. I don't remember what episode we saw Tango in. It was the cage. I do remember. Please save your letters. I have another question about Data, though.
Yeah.
So you're asking if he's acting logically. I'm actually wondering if he's acting nefariously. So because first of all, Picard says at the end of Act whatever, you got to stop talking to Sarjenka.
Yeah.
And Data's like, okay, I understand what you're saying. Which is not actually saying he will. He's just saying, oh, yep, yeah. I get you. And so then they have the meeting later, and Picard says, you have to sever all contact with Sarjenka. Data's a machine. He has received this order before. If he is not following this order, then he's not going to follow the order now. But the other thing I'm trying to figure out is, he like Picard says, you got to stop. And Data's like, okay, well, let me just go over here and turn off the radio where she's calling. Now, Data's a digital guy receiving digital information. Does he seriously have to hear her to know that he's isolating that frequency?
For everyone in the room.
Okay, well, that's what I'm saying. I think he's pulling a fast one. I think he's doing everything he can to try to help her. Mm-hmm. And so when Picard says turn off the radio, Data goes over and like tunes in the station that Picard doesn't want him to hear and turns it up really loud so that he can be sure he's turning off the right radio, apparently. Seems like he's manipulating the situation, which is even beyond what Spock used to do on the org chart.
Yeah.
Spock is the guy that I was talking about a minute ago who like, okay, well, here's my framework. So how can I do what I want to do and technically not violate this framework? Data's going a little bit further than that, it seems.
Yeah, I thought absolutely he was. And that was... It could have played out a different way, in which at the very beginning when it is revealed to the audience that Data has heard this initial plea,
right.
Well, it seems like the first meeting where this is revealed to the other crew members, that message would have played. Like Data's already said, hey, here's what's happened.
Right.
So now I'm going to play this. But we have this debate about the Prime Directive before we know that everybody else has heard that voice, which for dramatic purposes is actually pretty interesting in order to have that detached debate and just say, what if it's emotional? What if it's logical? Debate. then we get to kind of drive it home and put a name and a voice with the situation. So it did make me wonder about Data. This wasn't particularly a Data episode, but Data is perhaps acting a little strangely. Picard says, "Hey, congratulations, you're being more human."
Yeah.
But
you know what I found myself wondering, actually? Because it does appear that Data has not only violated the Prime Directive, but that he's countermanded Picard's orders.
Yeah.
How do you punish an android?
Well, exactly. At the end of this episode, I thought, okay, we violated the Prime Directive 9 ways to Sunday.
Yep.
And we erased a child's memory later, so we're all good with it.
Yeah. Right.
Right. But how does this get reported in the captain's log?
It doesn't.
And what does Data get? Just a slap on the wrist? Well, apparently he gets nothing. Picard gives him a pat on the back and says, "Good work, guy. You're more and more human every day." And I thought, what if a lower crewman had kicked off the same chain of events? Mm-hmm. What if it was, we haven't met him yet, but what if it's like a guy named Barclay who's somewhere...
That's a goofy name. There would never be a Barclay in Star Trek. What do you... That was the dog from Sesame Street, for crying out loud.
That's why I got it confused.
Oh, okay.
What if it's some guy in the lower decks who's the ham radio operator?
That's Data. I understand what you're saying, though. Go ahead. Yes. Yeah. What if it was not one of our senior staff?
I feel like
that did this.
I feel like the cook would not get a pat on the back and say, "Well done, you gave us all something to think about."
Yeah. That's a good point. I actually was thinking, though, like, how do you punish Data? Could you see, he doesn't even have emotions, though. I mean, would you as Picard say, okay, feel bad for 48 hours? Or would you just say, okay, act like you feel bad for 48 hours?
Because we can't tell the difference.
Go sit in the corner and run a process over what you've done.
I have submitted my email of resignation. The improper title of this episode has affected me greatly. Ken and John say they just need to check me out before I go, to make sure that I am okay.
Well, it's that time of the show where we end the show by asking questions about the messages, morals, and meanings, and whether or not the episode that we've covered this week stands the test of time. The episode, of course, this week, John, Pen Pals. Let me see if I can find a clever way to ask this. Oh, I got one. Okay. Is this episode anything to write home about?
Oh, I see what you did there, Ken.
Yeah, it's because it's a pen pal, although generally speaking, your pen pal doesn't live at home. But, not your home anyway. But pen pals, you want to do messages, morals, and meanings, or do you want to do whether it stands up?
No, I want to do standing up.
Okay.
First, holding up. Because I'll tell you this, it's definitely not a bad episode. When I saw that this was coming up in the queue, what I thought was, it's the one with the little orange girl.
Okay, you need to stop doing that, dude.
Well,
you treat every episode like an episode of Seinfeld or Friends or something. The one with, where this happens, or the one where that happens. I mean, they tend to be a little bit more meaty than that.
It's like how we title our shows.
That's true. Well, it's how we title the supplementals. Yeah. The one with that guy, the other one with that guy, the one with this other guy. Yeah. And occasionally we have a woman on as well.
Hear my logic, though, because the thing is this. I feel like if I were to get hung up on the idea of this is the one with the little orange girl, and maybe the makeup is good, maybe it's not, what's the deal with the cranium, what's the deal with the elongated finger, it would be as bad as me getting hung up on what the hoarder looks like. And as we know, Devil in the Dark is a brilliant episode, incredibly well written, and if you show that to somebody and they don't get the emotional resonance of that episode and what it says about us, then I'm sorry, you're hopeless. So I can say that this is not an amazing episode, but I'll definitely give it a pass because there's interesting ideas here, and we get a little more growth out of Wesley, certainly more than we did in the Dauphin. We got to talk about leadership, and we got to see leadership parallel in Wesley and in Picard. They both have decisions to make. They both have people they have to convince and they have to talk to. There are very interesting ways to think about Data here, too. Is this person, is Sarjenka really a friend? What does a friend mean to Data? And would he have an emotional reaction if he had just cut off communications and then the planet destroyed itself? Well, if he had done, as Picard said, okay, stop talking to her. Mm-hmm. Okay, I'm going to do that the first time. And then we orbit around a little bit more. Oh, look, well, the planet is imploding. At that point...
You think they'd stick around for that?
Well, I don't know. But we know that at that point, the only people who know about what's going on are Data and Picard. This has not bubbled its way up to the senior staff yet. So maybe Picard could live with himself. Could Data? Well, what is Data's reaction at that point? And well, if I were to make a joke about it, I could say that this is the kind of thing that Data throws back into Picard's face later on. Like, oh, yeah, I remember that time we stuck by the Prime Directive and you let a planet, including a little child that I was communicating with, all die.
Yeah. At the same time, I mean, you've now set a dangerous precedent of, well, the Prime Directive's just a thing.
Well, the Prime Directive is a thing, but the Prime Directive is a thing that can get debated. And that's what's interesting here, and that's why I definitely say that the episode holds up, even if there are things about it that don't necessarily sit right. What about you?
Yeah. I mean, it's weird. This is a lot of times we find a lot to talk about in a particularly bad episode. Mm-hmm. We found a lot to talk about in this episode, and it's not a bad episode. It is not a fast-moving episode. I would imagine that there are people who watch it who get kind of bored. I mean, the fact that you got voiceover in Act 3 that says we've been here for 6 weeks, I mean, indicates that it's not going to be a fast-moving episode, and yet there is a tremendous amount to consider. I will also say I don't know if it's because he was maturing as an actor. I don't know if it's because he finally had a good director. There was not an insufferable scene with Crusher. There are a couple that could have been a little bit stronger, but usually if an episode is going to center on Wesley at all, there's going to be some scene that you'd rather gouge your eyes out than watch a second time. Mm-hmm. And that did not happen this time, which is kind of great. It's great to see an episode hinge on Wesley that you don't have to grit your teeth through.
Yeah.
I mean, that was kind of neat. So, yeah, I would say this episode holds up. I mean, there are going to be people who are going to be bored by it, I think, but I think there was actually a tremendous amount here. It's a good thorny episode of Star Trek.
Well, so then let's talk about morals, meanings, and messages.
Okay.
Because here's the thing.
Mm-hmm.
This holds up as an episode of Star Trek. You and I agree. But there were points when I had to ask myself if the Prime Directive is of use to anyone outside of Star Trek fans debating the Prime Directive. Because there were moments in this where I just felt like, okay, it is a slow-moving episode. Have you seen that Onion, the Onion parody newspaper? They did a video about Star Trek fans not liking the J.J. Abrams movie because it didn't have the kind of slow, boring debates of the original Star Trek.
No, I didn't, but that's funny.
It's good. I'll send it to you. Maybe I'll post it on our website. But I kept thinking, like, okay, they're debating the fate of this planet and this alien and blah blah blah, and I thought there are other times when we've talked about the Prime Directive, like the Corbomite maneuver, where we get to analyze it from a very human point of view, which is, I'm going to be better than myself. I'm going to reach out a hand to help, even if it feels against my gut reaction to do so.
Right.
And this one played out in a very kind of academic way, but we got to infuse it with a little bit of that emotional temperance to help us come to a decision. So maybe then the way that I looked at it when looking at the message is that we're in this constant struggle of deciding when the needs of the few or the one outweigh the needs of the many. When is the right time to put aside the kind of moralistic platitudes and sticking by the rule book because there is somebody who needs help? Picard has that great line. You reminded us that there are obligations that go beyond duty. That's what he said to Data at the end.
Mm-hmm.
So the message then that I took away that holds up on a personal and a real world level, instead of just here's Star Trek, and again, here's people striking heroic poses and talking about lofty, high-minded ideals, that's the thing that I think has emotional resonance for an audience now. What about you?
Well, I mean, when you ask whether the Prime Directive is of any use to anyone, besides Star Trek fans who debate it, I think the Prime Directive is just a stand-in for a code of honor or a code of conduct or things that you've decided that you're going to do. And then those things are, as you say, those things are debatable. They're mutable. They're not, mutable might not be the right word. They're debatable, though. Yes, you've got this code of conduct, and sometimes that calls you to do wonderful things, and sometimes that calls you to do bad things. And yet we're still people who are trying to live by this code of conduct. So sometimes we may not live up to the wonderful things that it's calling us to. At the same time, we may not be so rigid that we're just going to, ignore what someone else needs. I think Pulaski said she could not subscribe to Worf's rigidity around the Prime Directive.
Yeah.
Is there a message? I don't know. I honestly don't know, unless the message is that your rules are meant to be broken. In a way. Just because you have this, very rigid idea of how things should go, there may be situations where you need to step outside of that. And certainly we should not miss the whole management angle. We shouldn't miss the whole command angle. You're a 25-year-old guy who's just been made manager of your Burger King, and you've got a 62-year-old guy who works there. Well, you can tell him what to do, because even though he's 40 years your senior, or a little bit less than that, it's still your job to lead. Yeah, and I don't know why I did the Burger King thing, except, I'm trying to put it in as real world a level as possible.
Sure.
The management tips in this, or the command tips in this, are interesting, even if you don't have anybody working for you. It's just the whole, I don't know how to do this. Well, start by doing it. And then, hopefully it'll get better and easier as you go. So the management or the command messages are the biggest messages, it seems to me. And the rest of it is really interesting sort of moral discussion and moral weighing. But either way, I think it all holds up both as an episode and as a group of messages if you take those messages away.
Agreed.
All right.
Agreed.
Well, cool.
All right.
Well, then I guess there's just a couple of other things to tell people. Mission Log is produced by Roddenberry Entertainment. Executive producer Rod Roddenberry, who, by the way, is not in the episode of Star Trek The Next Generation Pen Pals. You can find more about what he is into, though, at roddenberry.com. Actually, it's him and the whole Roddenberry organization. For more information, for more exciting Star Trek podcasts, you can check out Trek FM. That is online at trek.fm. And for the latest in Star Trek news and discussion, be sure to visit trekmovie.com.
Next week, Ken, we get revisited by an old friend. It's Q. Who?
Some of the music for Mission Log provided by Warp 11, online at warp11.com, and from the album Messages by Key Theory, free to download at kitheory.com. I think we all learned a valuable lesson today. I just wish I could remember what it was. End transmission.